There are moments in life when everything can change in a single heartbeat. 1 second, you are laughing, holding the hand of the person you love most, dreaming of the future you will build together. And the next, you find yourself staring at the fragile line between life and death, praying that love will be enough to hold on. This is the story of a young couple whose bond was tested in the darkest of ways. A story of hope, devotion, and a love so powerful that it defied silence, time, and the odds themselves. Ethan and Lily had always been described as inseparable. They were young, still learning about the world, but already they carried in their hearts a sense of commitment far deeper than their years suggested. Ethan was strong and hardworking, a man who believed that dignity came not from wealth or prestige, but from putting his whole soul into everything he did. Lily was gentle but resilient, a woman whose kindness could soften even the hardest days, yet whose determination was as unshakable as stone. Together, they were the kind of couple people admired quietly, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. Their home was modest, a small apartment where the walls carried laughter, where evenings meant cooking together in a cramped kitchen, where dreams were spoken late at night while lying side by side. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and to them that was everything. Ethan worked in construction, often long hours, lifting, building, sweating beneath the sun or in the bitter cold, while Lily worked part-time as a nurse's aide while studying to become a registered nurse. It wasn't easy, but they believed in each other's dreams, and that belief kept them going. But life has a way of testing the very foundation of what we hold most dear. It was a crisp autumn morning when it happened. Ethan kissed Lily goodbye at the doorway, his smile warm as always, his eyes full of promises of tomorrow. She teased him for forgetting his lunchbox again, and he laughed, rushing back to grab it before heading off. It was the kind of ordinary moment that never feels important until it becomes the last one you remember before everything changes. At the construction site, Ethan was doing what he always did, working hard, helping others, pushing through the day. But in one terrible instant, the ordinary became catastrophic. A scaffolding collapsed without warning, sending heavy beams crashing down. Ethan didn't have time to react. The sound of chaos filled the site, men shouting, machinery grinding to a halt, sirens in the distance. And then silence. Ethan lying motionless, his world fading to black. The call came to Lily while she was folding laundry, humming to herself. When she heard the words accident and hospital, the basket of clothes slipped from her hands, and her heart seemed to shatter inside her chest. She rushed to the hospital, each second an eternity, her mind clinging desperately to denial. She imagined him sitting up, bruised but smiling, reassuring her with that unshakable calm she had always known. But when she arrived, reality was harsher than anything she had feared. Ethan was in a coma. His injuries were severe, and though the doctors worked tirelessly, they could not promise her he would ever wake up. Machines breathed for him, wires traced the rhythm of his fragile life, and his face, so full of life just hours before, was now still and pale. Lily's world collapsed. The man she loved, the man who was her home, her partner, her best friend, lay trapped in silence. Yet as despair threatened to drown her, something inside her refused to let go. She remembered the vows they had whispered to each other on their wedding day, not in a grand church or surrounded by riches, but in a quiet ceremony beneath the open sky, promising to love, to fight, to endure, no matter what storms might come. She looked at him then, her tears falling, and she whispered the same words again. "I'm not leaving you, not now, not ever." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Friends tried to console her, some quietly urging her to move on, telling her she was too young to bind her life to a man who might never wake. But Lily's heart was unshakable. She visited him every day, sitting by his side, holding his hand, telling him stories about the world outside, about the sunrises he was missing, about the little things she was sure he would want to know. She brought him books and read aloud, played his favorite songs, whispered prayers into the silence. Sometimes, when exhaustion consumed her, she would rest her head on the edge of his bed, drifting into restless sleep while still holding his hand. Nurses would find her there in the mornings, her hair tangled, her face drawn, but her spirit unbroken. For Lily, hope was not a fragile wish. It was a choice she made every single day. But hope is never without struggle. There were nights when despair crept in, when the weight of bills piled on her table, when loneliness pressed against her chest, when she wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. There were days when she looked at Ethan and begged him through her tears to give her a sign. Anything to show he was still there, still fighting. And yet, every time she felt herself slipping, she would remember the way he had looked at her in their ordinary, happy days. Eyes full of love, full of trust. That memory became her anchor, and she clung to it with everything she had. One evening, months into this endless vigil, Lily brought in an old photo album. She placed it on the bed and began to flip through the pages, showing Ethan the moments they had captured. Their first vacation by the lake, the Christmas tree they had decorated with borrowed ornaments, the silly faces they had made at each other during long car rides. She laughed softly through her tears, saying, "Do you remember, Ethan? Do you remember how happy we were? You promised me forever, and I'm holding you to that promise." And though the machines kept their steady rhythm, though his eyes remained closed, though his lips did not move, Lily swore she felt his fingers twitch against hers. It was so faint, so fleeting, that the nurses called it a reflex, nothing more. But for Lily it was enough. Enough to ignite a flame that refused to go out. She began to believe that somewhere inside, he could hear her, that her words, her love, her faith, were reaching him in the silence of his coma. And so she spoke to him even more, refusing to let him feel alone, even in the darkness. She told him of her struggles, of the bills she was fighting to pay, of the exhaustion she carried, of the fear that sometimes broke her. But she also told him of her dreams, of the life they still had waiting, of the children they had once talked about having, of the future they had not yet lived. And as the seasons changed outside the hospital walls, Lily's love did not waver. She planted herself like a tree beside him, rooted in faith, watered by tears, reaching always for the light. This was not just a fight for Ethan's life. It was a fight for their love, for the promise they had built, for the belief that even in the darkest silence, love could still speak louder. And though no one could see it yet, beneath the stillness of his body, deep inside his unconscious mind, Ethan was listening. Somewhere in the shadows of his coma, her voice was the anchor pulling him back, the thread connecting him to the world, the spark reminding him that love was waiting for him to return. Because sometimes, love is not just what we feel when life is easy. Sometimes, love is the battle we fight when everything else is lost. And Lily was prepared to fight for as long as it took. The weeks passed, each one blurring into the next, until time itself seemed to lose its meaning. For Lily, life had become measured not in hours or days, but in heartbeats, those steady, fragile beats of Ethan's heart as the machines traced their rhythm. Every morning she woke with the same prayer on her lips. Please, let today be the day he opens his eyes. And every night she left the hospital with the same whisper, I'll be back tomorrow. I'm not giving up on you. But as the months dragged on, the weight of reality pressed heavier against her shoulders. The hospital bills grew higher, her job hours grew longer, and exhaustion etched itself into her face. Friends who had once come often began to visit less, their voices softer, their encouragement weaker. Some stopped coming altogether, afraid to witness the endless waiting, afraid to face the question they would never ask her out loud. What if he never wakes up? The doctors, too, grew cautious with their words. At first, they had spoken of possibilities, of time being the greatest healer, of miracles that sometimes came when least expected. But gradually, their tone shifted. One gray morning, the head physician sat with Lily, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a practiced calm. "Your husband has been in this condition for many months now. The chances of recovery grow smaller with each passing day. We must prepare for the possibility that he may never return to the life you once knew." Lily listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her heart aching with every word. She nodded politely, but inside, A fire burned against the despair. She refused to let statistics define the man she loved. Ethan was not just a case, not just a number in some medical chart. He was her husband, her partner, the man whose laughter had been her favorite sound, whose dreams had been woven with hers. And she knew, deep within her soul, that he was still in there, still fighting. That evening, as she sat by his side, she held his hand and whispered, "They don't know you like I do, Ethan. They don't know how strong you are, how stubborn you can be when you've set your mind on something. They don't understand that love doesn't give up. Not now, not ever. So don't you give up either. Do you hear me? We're in this together." She leaned her head against his arm, closing her eyes, and for the briefest moment, she imagined she felt his warmth pulse back against her cheek, as if he were answering her silently, as if he were saying, "I hear you. I'm trying." But still, his eyes remained closed. Life outside the hospital did not pause to wait for Lily's heartbreak. She had bills to pay, groceries to buy, and shifts to cover. Her days became a cycle of work, hospital visits, and restless sleep. She walked through the world like a shadow of herself, her thoughts always tied to the man lying in that bed. At times, she wondered how much longer she could carry the weight of both their lives. Yet each time she reached her breaking point, something, some memory, some whisper of faith, pulled her back from despair. One night, after an especially grueling double shift at the nursing home, Lily arrived at the hospital and found Ethan's room unusually quiet. The nurse on duty gave her a sympathetic smile, the kind that carried both warmth and pity, and Lily's heart tightened with fear. She rushed inside, only to find everything as it had been. Ethan lying still, machines humming, the same silence filling the air. She exhaled shakily, sinking into the chair beside him. Her body trembled with exhaustion. She held his hand and began to speak, her voice breaking. "I can't lie, Ethan. I'm tired. So tired. Sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough for this. Sometimes I wonder if I'm imagining things, if I'm holding on to hope that isn't real. Everyone tells me to let go. Everyone tells me to move on. But I can't, because I still believe in us. I still believe in you." She paused, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, her tears dripping onto the bedsheet. "So if you can hear me, even just a little, please, give me something. Anything. Let me know you're still in there, fighting with me." The room was silent, save for the steady beep of the monitor. Lily closed her eyes, her heart aching with the emptiness. And then, so faint she thought she imagined it, she felt the smallest squeeze of his fingers around hers. Her breath caught. She stared at his hand, her heart pounding. "Ethan? Was that you?" She waited, her whole world hanging on that moment. And then, again, the faintest pressure, his fingers curling weakly around hers. Tears streamed down her face as she laughed through her sobs. "You're still here. I knew it. I knew it." She kissed his hand, holding it against her cheek. "Don't stop fighting, Ethan. Don't stop now. I'll stay right here. I'll fight with you every step of the way." The doctors, when told of the incident, explained it away as a reflex, the kind that comatose patients sometimes exhibit. But Lily refused to accept that. To her, it was a message, a signal from the man she loved, and no one could take that away from her. From that day on, her hope grew stronger. She began to speak to him with renewed conviction, as though he could truly hear her, as though her words were a rope pulling him back toward the surface of life. She told him about the world outside, the flowers blooming in spring, the children laughing in the park, the little details of life he was missing. She told him of her struggles, her fears, her dreams. She shared with him the stories of the patients she cared for, the lessons she was learning, the faith that sustained her. And though his body did not move, though his eyes remained closed, Lily believed with every fiber of her being that he was listening. But not every day was full of hope. Some days were storms, where fear clawed at her and despair whispered cruelly in her ear. One night, after hearing yet another doctor tell her she should prepare for the worst, Lily sat in the hospital chapel, her hands folded tightly, her tears falling freely. "God," she whispered into the silence, "I don't know how much longer I can do this, But if there's even the smallest chance for Ethan to come back to me, please, please give me the strength to keep holding on. As she prayed, she felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet reassurance that she was not alone. She rose from that chapel with her spirit steadied, her resolve renewed. She walked back to Ethan's room, sat by his side and whispered, "We're not finished yet. You and me, we've still got a life to live." And in the depths of his silence, in the shadows of his coma, Ethan stirred. Not in his body, not in ways visible to the outside world, but deep inside, where memory and love lingered. He heard her voice, faint and far away, like a light in the darkness. He clung to it, reaching for it, fighting through the fog. And though he could not yet break free, something inside him whispered back to her, "I'm trying, Lily. I'm trying to come back to you." For love has a power beyond what science can measure, beyond what reason can explain. And Lily's love was building a bridge across the impossible, carrying Ethan slowly, painfully, but surely back toward the world of the living. The journey was far from over. The road ahead would demand even more of her. More strength, more patience, more faith than she thought she possessed. But Lily was ready. She had already made her choice. She would not give up, not until Ethan returned to her. Because sometimes, love is not about the easy moments. Sometimes, love is about holding on when everything tells you to let go. And Lily was determined to hold on, no matter how long it took. The days that followed the faint squeeze of Ethan's hand became a turning point in Lily's heart. Though the doctors dismissed it as a reflex, Lily carried that moment like a lantern in the dark. Each time she felt her strength waver, she replayed it in her mind. The subtle curl of his fingers around hers, the undeniable sign that somewhere inside, he was still fighting. That memory became her anchor, her proof that hope was not foolish but necessary. She began to notice things she hadn't before. The way his eyelids seemed to flutter, as though in response to her voice. The way his breathing changed when she spoke of their memories together. The faintest twitch of his lips when she told him stories of their silly inside jokes. To anyone else, these were meaningless. To Lily, they were pieces of a puzzle. Evidence that Ethan was still with her, just trapped behind an invisible wall. One afternoon, she brought in a small photo album, the one they had made during their first year of marriage. Sitting by his bedside, she opened it and began to flip through the pages. "Do you remember this day?" she asked softly, pointing to a picture of them at the beach, their faces sun-kissed, their arms wrapped around each other. "You chased me into the water, even though it was freezing, and then you pretended a crab bit your toe just to make me laugh. I laughed so hard I couldn't breathe." Her voice cracked as she traced the photo with her fingers. "I miss that laugh, Ethan. I miss hearing your voice. But I believe someday I will again." She pressed the photo against his chest, right above his heart. "Come back to me. Let's make more memories like this." For a moment, she swore she saw the faintest flicker behind his closed eyes, a twitch that lasted less than a second. She leaned closer, whispering, "I saw that. Don't you dare stop now." But progress was slow, agonizingly so. Weeks passed, and though small signs appeared, Ethan remained in his coma. The hospital staff began to gently suggest that Lily consider long-term care facilities, places where Ethan could be looked after indefinitely. They warned her of the toll it was taking on her health, on her finances, on her spirit. But Lily shook her head each time. "This is where I belong," she said simply. "Right here beside him, until he wakes up." Her family worried. Friends tried to intervene. They told her she was wasting her youth, wasting her energy on a man who might never come back. But Lily's reply never changed. "Ethan is my husband. He didn't give up on me when life got hard, and I won't give up on him. Not now. Not ever." Still, the loneliness pressed heavy on her chest. At night, when she returned to their empty apartment, the silence screamed at her. She would curl up in their bed, clutching Ethan's pillow, inhaling the faint scent that still lingered there. Sometimes she dreamed of him, dreams so vivid they felt real. In those dreams, Ethan walked toward her, smiling, reaching out his hand. And just before she could touch him, She would wake, her hand clutching only air. It was in those moments, in the quiet hours when hope felt like a cruel trick, that Lily nearly broke. But then she would remember his hand squeezing hers, the flicker of his eyelids, the warmth of his heartbeat under her palm. And she would rise again, determined to face another day. One morning, as the sun filtered weakly through the hospital blinds, Lily sat by his bed reading aloud. It had become her ritual. She chose a novel Ethan had loved, one they had read together years before, and let her voice fill the sterile room. Her words were steady, even as her heart trembled with the ache of longing. Halfway through a chapter, she paused to sip water. It was then she noticed it. Ethan's lips, moving ever so slightly. Her eyes widened. She set the book aside, leaning closer. "Ethan, did you try to say something?" His lips parted again, a faint sound escaping, barely a whisper, almost inaudible. Lily's heart raced as she leaned so close her ear nearly brushed his mouth. "Say it again," she urged, her voice shaking. This time, the sound was clearer, though weak and broken. A single word, her name. "Lily." Her breath caught. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh my God, Ethan, you spoke. You really spoke." She grabbed his hand, sobbing. "I'm here. I've been here all along. Don't stop now. Keep fighting. Come back to me." His eyes remained closed, his body still weak, but the sound of her name from his lips was enough to shatter the walls of despair around her. It was real. It wasn't her imagination. He was in there, reaching for her. When the doctors heard of it, they were cautious. They ran tests, checked his brain activity, measured his vitals. It could be involuntary, they warned, a fleeting neurological response. But Lily shook her head with fierce conviction. "No, that was my husband. He called for me. He's trying to come back." And from that moment, Lily doubled her efforts. She read more, spoke more, sang softly to him, played his favorite songs. She filled his world with reminders of life, of love, of the bond they had built together. Every day, she whispered the same promise into his ear. "I'll be right here when you wake up." Ethan's progress remained fragile, uncertain. Some days, there was nothing, only silence. Other days, there were faint movements, whispers of awareness. But each small sign was a victory to Lily, proof that love could reach across even the deepest chasm. One evening, as she sat by his side, the sun setting in golden streaks through the window, Lily closed her eyes and began to pray aloud. "God, I don't know how this will end. I don't know what tomorrow holds. But I believe in the man you gave me. I believe in our love. And I will not let go. Not now, not ever." Unbeknownst to her, deep in the labyrinth of Ethan's mind, those words became a rope pulling him upward. In the fog of his unconsciousness, he saw her face, her smile, her tears. He heard her voice calling his name. And though the path was long and painful, he began to climb, one small step at a time, toward the light of her love. The story of Ethan and Lily was far from over. The hardest battles still lay ahead. But in that hospital room, filled with the hum of machines and the unshakable devotion of a wife who refused to let go, something miraculous was beginning to stir. Because love, when it refuses to surrender, has the power to awaken even the deepest of sleeps. The days after Ethan whispered Lily's name unfolded like a fragile dream. For so long, she had lived in silence, clinging to the faintest signs that hearing his voice, even as weak and broken as it was, felt like a miracle she barely dared to trust. Each morning she rushed into his room, her heart pounding with the same question. Would today bring another word, another flicker, another sign that he was fighting his way back to her? At first, it was only tiny whispers, fragments of sound that came and went like faint echoes carried on the wind. Sometimes it was her name again, spoken so softly she had to lean close to hear it. Other times it was a word cut short, incomplete, a syllable trapped between silence and speech. The doctors were cautious, reminding her that recovery was uncertain, that the brain's pathways were complex, that progress could stall at any moment. But Lily knew better. She had seen the determination in Ethan long before this. She had seen it in the way he built their life with his hands, in the way he loved her without hesitation, in the way he had always kept his promises. One evening, she walked into the hospital carrying a small speaker. She set it gently on the table beside his bed and pressed play. Their wedding song filled the sterile room, the melody tender and haunting. Lily sat down, taking his hand, and whispered, "Do you remember this, Ethan? You held me close that night, and I told you that no matter what storms we faced, we'd face them together. This is one of those storms, and I'm not letting go." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Ethan's lips moved. His voice was hoarse, broken, barely audible, but it was there. "Together," he rasped, the word trembling with effort. Lily gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. She kissed his hand again and again, sobbing with joy. Yes, together. Always together. News of his progress began to ripple through the hospital. Nurses peeked in with smiles, rooting for them quietly. Doctors shook their heads in wonder at the resilience unfolding before them. And yet, they tempered their optimism with caution, reminding Lily that the road ahead was long, that the brain was unpredictable, that nothing was guaranteed. But Lily didn't need guarantees. She needed faith. She needed love. And she had both. The next weeks became a slow, painstaking journey. Ethan began to respond to simple commands. His fingers curled when she asked him to squeeze her hand. His eyelids fluttered longer, as though he were trying to force them open. His words, though few, grew clearer. Each day was a victory, no matter how small. But with progress came fear. Lily worried that she was asking too much of him, that pushing him could cause harm. Some nights, she sat awake in the hospital chair, her mind torn between hope and terror. What if he slipped away again? What if this fragile progress unraveled? What if love wasn't enough? And yet, every time doubt threatened to consume her, Ethan gave her something, just enough to keep her standing. A whisper, a flicker, a sigh that seemed almost purposeful. They were not just signs of life. They were promises, as if Ethan was telling her, "I'm still here. Don't stop now." Then, one extraordinary morning, everything changed. Lily had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, her head resting on the edge of his bed, her fingers entwined with his. A soft voice broke the silence. "Lily!" Her eyes snapped open, her heart hammering in her chest. She lifted her head, staring at him in disbelief. His lips had moved. No, not just moved, but formed her name with a clarity she hadn't heard in months. She leaned closer, tears filling her eyes. "Say it again," she whispered. "Lily," he croaked, his voice raspy but unmistakable. His eyelids fluttered, straining against the weight that had held them shut for so long. And then, slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. For a moment, the world stopped. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she stared into the eyes she had longed to see for so long. They were glazed, unfocused, but they were Ethan's. They were hers. A sob tore from her chest as she cupped his face in her hands. "You're back," she cried. "Oh my God, Ethan, you're back." His lips trembled as though the effort of speaking was monumental, but he forced the words out anyway. "Told you, I'd never leave." She collapsed against him, holding him as tightly as she dared, her tears soaking his hospital gown. In that moment, the sterile room transformed into holy ground. Love had pierced through the darkness. Hope had triumphed where despair had tried to reign. The staff rushed in, astonished, bustling with activity as monitors beeped and voices filled the air. But Lily heard none of it. All she could hear was Ethan's voice, fragile but real, echoing in her soul. The days that followed were filled with cautious joy. Ethan's recovery was slow, his body weak, his speech limited. He tired quickly, and frustration sometimes clouded his face when he couldn't do what he once had so easily. But Lily was there at every step, encouraging, patient, loving. She celebrated every milestone as though it were a miracle, because to her it was. One afternoon, as she helped him sit up in bed, Ethan caught her hand and whispered, "You stayed. His eyes, though still heavy with fatigue, shone with wonder. "Of course I stayed," Lily replied, her voice breaking. She kissed his forehead softly. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." Tears glistened in his eyes. He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. "You saved me." Lily shook her head, brushing her fingers through his hair. "No, Ethan. Love saved you. Our love." The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with therapy sessions, rehabilitation, and countless challenges. But none of it mattered to Lily. What mattered was that he was back, that his eyes were open, that his voice could once again fill the silence. She had walked through fire and refused to burn. She had stood against despair and refused to fall. And now, as she sat beside the man she loved more than life itself, she knew the truth. Love, when it is real and relentless, can pull someone back from the very edge of darkness. Their story was not finished. In many ways, it was only beginning again. But for Lily, every heartbeat she heard against her ear, every whispered word from Ethan's lips, was proof that miracles still existed, and she would never, ever stop believing. The weeks that followed felt like years for Emily. Each day was stitched together with the same fragile rhythm. Wake up before dawn, pack her bag with a thermos of coffee and a small sandwich, head to the hospital, and sit by James's side until her own body demanded rest. The chair she occupied had molded itself to her shape, the nurses often leaving an extra pillow for her because they knew she would spend hours leaning against the edge of his bed, whispering to him as if he were just pretending to be asleep. The doctors were cautiously neutral in their updates. They never said he wouldn't wake up, but they never promised he would. Emily clung to every small sign as if it were a miracle. When his hand twitched beneath hers, when his breathing seemed deeper, when the monitors hummed in steadier patterns. She turned those small shifts into hope, weaving them into stories she would tell herself as if they were proof of progress. And while the hospital became her second home, her real home began to fall apart. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter. The refrigerator grew emptier by the day. She had sold her engagement ring 2 weeks earlier, a decision that broke her heart, but filled their pantry with enough food for a month. When her neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, noticed the sagging mailbox and the darkened porch, she came knocking with groceries and a warm hug. "Don't give up, Querida," she whispered. "Miracles happen when love refuses to let go." Emily cried that night, not out of despair but out of the overwhelming weight of carrying hope alone and then realizing she wasn't truly alone. The community that once felt distant was now showing up, bringing meals, dropping off gas money, slipping small envelopes under her door. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. Enough to remind her that her love for James wasn't invisible to the world. One evening, while the rain tapped gently against the hospital windows, Emily sat with a book she hadn't opened in weeks. She read aloud, her voice steady, as if telling a bedtime story. She spoke about characters fighting for their dreams, about heroes who refused to surrender. And when she closed the book, she leaned close to James's ear and whispered, "That's us, James. That's our story. You're the hero who won't give up. You're the man I fell in love with because you always kept moving forward, no matter how hard it was. I'm not leaving you now. I never will." In that quiet room, something happened. His fingers twitched, not just once, not just by accident. They curled slightly against hers. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. She looked at the monitor, then back at his hand. "James?" she whispered, tears already pooling in her eyes. "James, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand, please." For a moment, nothing. The silence stretched so painfully long that her chest ached. But then, slowly, gently, his fingers pressed against her palm. Her cry broke the silence, a sound filled with both disbelief and joy. She pressed the call button, shouting for the nurse. Doctors rushed in, shining lights into James's eyes, checking his vitals, speaking words Emily could barely hear over the pounding of her heartbeat. "There's responsiveness," one of them said, his tone tinged with restrained excitement. "This is a good sign." Emily held onto that phrase like it was gold. A good sign. She kissed James's hand over and over, sobbing, laughing, thanking him for fighting, thanking God for listening. The nurses smiled softly at her, some holding back their own tears, because they had seen many families give up, but rarely had they seen such fierce devotion. The following days were a blur of cautious optimism. James's eyelids fluttered more often, his hand movements became less random, his breathing steadier. Emily barely left his side, feeding him words of encouragement, recounting every moment they had shared before the accident. She told him about their first kiss under the old oak tree, about the road trips with broken-down cars and laughter that never stopped, about the night he had asked her to marry him when they were both too young and too broke but so deeply in love that none of it mattered. And one morning, as the sun spilled through the blinds, golden and gentle, James's eyes opened. Not just a flutter, not just a reflex, but wide and searching. He blinked against the light, confused, lost, but alive. Emily gasped, pressing both hands over her mouth before leaning in. "James," she whispered, trembling. "It's me. It's Emily." His lips parted, dry and weak. His voice was barely audible, but she heard it, the most beautiful sound she could imagine. Eily. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing with joy, her tears wetting the fabric of his hospital gown. "You came back to me," she cried. "I knew you would. I never stopped believing. I never stopped waiting." The doctors entered, their expressions a mix of astonishment and satisfaction. They spoke about recovery, about the long road ahead, about therapy and patience. But Emily didn't care about the length of the journey anymore. She only cared that James was there to walk it with her. That evening, when everyone else had left the room and the machines hummed softly in the background, James turned his head with effort, his gaze heavy but filled with love. "You stayed," he whispered. Emily kissed his forehead gently, her voice steady even through her tears. "Of course I stayed. I promised you forever, James. And forever means even when the world tells me to let go. I'll never stop choosing you." And though his body was weak, his lips curved into the faintest smile, a fragile miracle that lit the room brighter than any lamp. The days that followed James's awakening were filled with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Every small milestone felt monumental. The first time he could sip water without help, the first time he managed to squeeze her hand with strength rather than weakness, the first time he sat upright supported by pillows. For Emily, these were not just medical achievements. They were proof that miracles bloomed quietly when love refused to surrender. The rehabilitation process was grueling. Muscles that had lain dormant for weeks needed to be retrained, coaxed back to life with persistence and pain. Physical therapists came daily, guiding him through movements that left him shaking and drenched in sweat. There were moments when James closed his eyes and whispered, "I can't." Moments when defeat hovered over him like a dark cloud. But Emily was always there. She knelt beside him, held his face in her hands, and whispered, "Yes, you can. You already did the hardest part. You came back. Every step after this is just proof of how strong you are." Her voice became his anchor. Every time he faltered, he searched her eyes and found strength. Every time he doubted himself, she reminded him of the man he had always been. Resilient, brave, the same man who once worked double shifts so they could afford their first tiny apartment. Slowly, his spirit ignited again, fueled by her faith. Weeks turned into months. James moved from the hospital to a rehabilitation center, and from there finally back home. Their house no longer looked like the one they had shared before the accident. It bore the weight of hardship, of unpaid bills and unkept corners. But to James, it was still the place that smelled of Emily's warmth, the place where love lived. The community that had rallied around Emily continued to show up. Neighbors helped repaint the porch, friends from church filled their freezer with meals, and James's former coworkers raised money to cover part of his medical expenses. It wasn't enough to erase all the struggles, but it was enough to remind them that kindness multiplied when shared. One evening, after a long day of physical therapy, James sat in the backyard with Emily. The sun was setting, painting the sky with strokes of pink and gold. He leaned heavily on his cane, still adjusting to the rhythm of walking again, but his smile was steady. "I've been thinking," he said softly, About what? Emily asked, turning toward him. About how close I came to losing everything, he replied, his voice breaking. And about how you never let go of me. You kept me here, Emily. You gave me a reason to come back. Tears welled in her eyes, but she reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You came back because you're stronger than anyone I know. I just held on. No, James whispered, shaking his head. You carried me when I couldn't carry myself. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'll never take you for granted again. Emily laughed softly, wiping her tears. James, we've already proven everything. We made it through the impossible. But James wasn't finished. His gaze was steady, his tone certain. No, Em, I want to marry you again. Emily's mouth fell open, surprise flooding her face. James, we're already married. I know, he said with a smile. But that wedding was before we knew what forever really meant. We said in sickness and in health, but we had no idea what that promise would demand. Now we do, and I want to stand in front of everyone we love, in front of this community that carried us, and say those vows again. Because this time, I'll understand every word. Emily's tears fell freely now, her heart swelling until it felt too big for her chest. She threw her arms around him, holding him tightly. Yes, she whispered into his ear. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The news of their renewal spread quickly through the town, igniting a wave of joy. Friends, neighbors, even strangers who had followed their journey wanted to be part of it. A local florist donated the flowers, a baker insisted on making the cake, and the small church on the corner offered its doors free of charge. For weeks, the community worked together to give Emily and James a wedding that was not just a celebration of love, but a victory over despair. When the day arrived, James stood at the altar, supported by his cane but tall with pride. He wore a simple suit that a friend had altered to fit his changed body, and though he still moved with care, his eyes sparkled with life. Emily walked down the aisle in a borrowed gown, her steps slow but steady, her smile radiant. Every eye in the room blurred with tears, for they weren't just witnessing a ceremony. They were witnessing proof that love could conquer trials that would have broken most hearts. When James took Emily's hands in his voice trembled but never faltered. Emily, I promise you again today what I promised you before, but this time I know the weight of those words. I promise to love you when life is easy and when it asks more of us than we think we can give. I promise to hold on when storms threaten to break us, to fight for us when hope feels small. You stayed when you had every reason to leave. You believed when the world told you not to. And because of you, I am here. I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of the love you gave me when I could give you nothing in return. Emily's voice shook as she replied, her tears glistening in the candlelight. James, I promised forever once, and today I promise it again, knowing now what forever really looks like. I promise to love you in every valley and every mountain, to stand beside you when the world feels cruel, and to rejoice with you in every miracle we're given. You are my greatest blessing, my best friend, my miracle. When they kissed, the church erupted with applause and tears. The moment was not polished or perfect. It was raw, real, filled with the power of a love that had been tested and had not only survived but grown stronger. As the evening ended and the lights dimmed, James leaned close to Emily, whispering words only she could hear. Thank you for not letting go. She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. Thank you for coming back to me. And as they danced slowly under strings of lights, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had witnessed their journey, they knew their story would live far beyond this day. It was no longer just theirs. It was a beacon for anyone who had ever faced despair, proof that love, when it refuses to surrender, can turn tragedy into triumph. Emily had once sat by his bedside in silence, clinging to hope in the darkest hours. Now she danced with him under the stars, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Their love had been tested in fire and had emerged unshakable. The accident had nearly stolen everything from them, but in its shadow, they had discovered something deeper than they ever thought possible. A love so fierce, so resilient, that it rewrote the ending of their story into something not just positive, but miraculous. And for the rest of their days, whenever someone asked them how they survived such darkness, Emily would smile and answer simply, "We didn't give up on each other, and that was enough."